Hello friends, welcome World War I Part 2. Let's start the video. The declares war on Serbia. Russia sees this as an attempt to annex Serbia. And so Russia went to save Serbia. Germany saw that Russia was taking arms against the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so Germany went to save the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This time, France doesn't stay behind. France reached there in support of Russia and Serbia. This created an interesting chain, called the chain of friendship. This is an interesting caricature, drawn to describe the situation. Italy was in alliance with Austria-Hungary and Germany. But Italy reneges on the agreement to support the two, because the agreement stated that in case of an attack on their country, the others would help them. But it was Austria-Hungary and Germany that were invading Serbia. They started the attacks. So Italy claimed that they weren't bound to help. But because the Ottoman Empire had enmity with Russia, the Ottoman Empire reached in support of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The United Kingdom gets involved in this too, because Russia, France, and Britain had an alliance treaty called the Triple Entente. This was how the Great War ensued, in which all these countries were at war with each other. Later, countries like the USA and Japan joined this war in support of Britain and France. And obviously, the countries that were under British rule, like India, gets involved in this war, because the British needed soldiers. And the easiest option was to use the people of the countries Britain had colonized as soldiers. Many Indians went to participate in World War I on behalf of Britain. Friends, this was how World War I began. But a pertinent question arises here. Why were all these countries so eager to go on a war against each other? If something like this happens today, so many countries wouldn't get into the war. What was so different then? That these countries readily went to war. Friends, it said that there were four main reasons for it. Friends, here nationalism means a nationalism without liberation, a nationalism without independence, a nationalism that was based on race, on the belief that their country is the best in the world, and to have an aggressive attitude against the other countries, looking at other countries as inferiors. Bismarck had united Germany in 1871 on the basis of nationalism. But Germany was still a constitutional monarchy under the Prussian monarchy. The kings and emperors took advantage of this nationalism among people. They convinced people to go on a war for their country. And they declared war for imperialism, to capture and occupy the other countries. You might think that it is so difficult to manage one's own country. Why would these people want to expand the borders of their countries? Why did they want to invade other countries, causing them a greater administrative headache? Friends, the simple answer to this is looting. The kings and emperors annexed other countries for their pride, to gain power, by comparing the sizes of their empires, and to exploit the resources in those areas. If gold was found somewhere, they'd loot it, to keep it in their treasury. By the 1900s, this process of looting was carried on by capitalist countries too. like the East India Company. It was the East India Company that had first captured areas in India and started draining India's wealth. That's why many people call imperialism the highest stage of capitalism. Capitalists capture other countries, exploit the raw material and cheap labor there to earn more profit. A famous capitalist of the time, Henry Ford, the founder of the Ford Company, gave a famous statement on war and capitalism. There are numerous interesting things to know about World War I. But if I start telling you all of them, this video would be hours long. Now, let's return to the topic. Friends, this imperialism wasn't possible without militarism. The countries had to spend a lot of money on their military so that they could invade more countries simply by brute force. The Royal Navy of the British was the largest navy in the world then. With its help, Britain could run their large imperialistic empire. The six great powers of the time, Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and Italy, had combined military spending of around £94 million in 1870. And by 1914, it had increased to 4 times this. All of these countries were spending a lot of money on military. These countries were greatly interested in imperialism, of capturing as many countries as possible to extend their empire. Friends, the most interesting thing was that when I talk about a country here, by country, I mostly mean the monarch of the country, the ruler of the empire, because there weren't democracies. They paid no heed to the people's opinions. The wishes of the one at the top ran the country, and the monarchs were very ruthless. Kaiser Wilhelm II was the ruler of Germany then. He is believed to be a hot-tempered ruler. He was always worried about an attack on Germany by France, Britain, or Russia. In Russia, Tsar Nicholas II was having trouble maintaining his position. He was the last emperor of the Russian Empire, and Britain's head of state was King George V. Want to know an interesting fact? These 3 rulers were first cousins of each other. They literally belonged to the same family. The rulers of 3 countries. Can you imagine that? World War I was literally a Game of Thrones. You can think of this as a family feud. It is said that Queen Victoria had tried to get them to stop the war, but after her death, it couldn't be possible. The 4th reason cited here was the alliances. There were many political alliances in force among these countries. The Triple Alliance was formed in 1882. Among Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Italy. These 3 countries had promised mutual support to each other if any of the great powers were attacked. The second major alliance was formed in 1907, called the Triple Entente, among Great Britain, France, and Russia. The original reason behind forming these alliances was imperialism. Since the countries were trying to capture the other countries, they'd later feel jealous when some other country captured more countries. They were constantly worried that if such and such country captured any particular region, they would need to capture more to protect themselves. This was all they did. In this case, how did the commoners fare? Why would the commoners fight among themselves for their rulers? Did the people want World War I? Friends, the answer to this is mostly no. But the commoners were still pushed into the war. The first reason was that the job of the soldier then was for the poor. A common man would become a soldier, put his life at risk for the greed of a ruler. Why would someone want to do this? To earn money. For the lack of employment. The people that couldn't get employed anywhere else looked for jobs as soldiers in these countries. It is a different matter to fight a war to protect one's country. But to capture another country, to invade another country, why would anyone want to fight in a war? From where would they get the motivation? The answer to this is the propaganda that used to be spread then. Linguistic nationalism. The newspapers and media at the time created an image that to enlist oneself in the army was a noble profession, labeling it as a selfless service for the country. Soldiers were shown as gentlemen, disciplined heroes. The media started glorifying war. For example, Britain had gone on the Crimean War against Russia once. And because of a failed military action, 200 British soldiers were killed. But the newspaper exaggerated it so much to highlight it. And the article that was printed in the Times, London, even though the top leadership made horrible decisions in the battle, due to which soldiers had to lose their lives, it was still shown as a heroic act. The monarch of Britain appointed an official poet, Alfred Tennyson. He wrote the poem The Charge of the Light Brigade. This was one of the first poems in the world that showed a soldier as a hero. Another famous English poet, Rupert Brooke, his poems The Soldier, The Dead, portrayed war and death as glorious things. He lost his life in World War I. And Winston Churchill used his poem as a death note to recruit more people. This was the type of was-mongering propaganda that was spread then. It was shown that going on a war for your country was a great act. I'm putting quotes on country here, because there wasn't a democratic country there. The country referred to the rule of the emperor. And you were basically going on a war for the ruler. But not everyone fell under the influence of the propaganda. There were many people in these countries who were completely against the war. America's Socialist Party, the Italian Socialist Party, British Labour Party, Russia's Bolsheviks, Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg in Germany. Apart from them, there were many other groups of people, like the anarchists and syndicalists, who believed in internationalism. Some people opposed the war on the basis of religion and humanity, like Henry Ford and Valentin Bulgakov. Additionally, there were poets and intellectuals like Rudyard Kipling as well. Against the war. You'd recognize him as the author of The Jungle Book. Against the poem The Charge of the Light Brigade, he wrote a counter-poem, The Last of the Light Brigade. It highlights the inhumane conditions that a soldier has to go through while fighting in a war. Similarly, there were poems by Wilfred Owen that showed the bitter truth of the war. Poisonous fumes, wounded limbs, coughing blood. If you can truly understand the conditions that a soldier has to go through in war, then you would never look at war with enthusiasm. Perhaps the most legendary anti-war poem was written by Thomas Hardy in 1909. The Man He Killed. In this poem, he focuses on a soldier that has killed another soldier. Because both were unemployed. They had no work. Driven by the need to earn money for their family. They enlisted as soldiers. Fought for their country. Looked at each other and shot at one another. But had the same two people met each other in a restaurant in one of their countries, perhaps they would have merrily sang together and dined. And reveled together. These are the reasons, friends, that every soldier that fought in World War I did not come under the influence of the terrible warmongering. And we witnessed several cases of mutinies. There was a case in France where an entire battalion gave up their arms because they didn't want to fight in the war. In Russia, the soldiers waged a war against their rulers. But the Christmas truce of 1914 was the most interesting case. While the war was going on in 1914, come Christmas, the British and German soldiers came together to celebrate Christmas on the battlefield. They exchanged food, sang together, and celebrated together. Because these common folks literally had no reason to fight in this war. But then their commanders ordered them to stop celebrating and to continue with the war. They started punishing the soldiers. If they refused to fight, they would be shot down by their own troops. If someone deserts from the battles, they would be punished when caught. The soldiers were given such punishments by the country they were fighting for, to force them to fight in the war. Eventually, World War I happened. And what exactly happened then? Let's talk about that in some future video. In part 2 of this video, let's talk about the countries that fought in World War II and the countries that won. I hope you found the video informative. Please subscribe my channel. Let's meet in the next video. Thank you very much.